I think we're live. I think that's it. I think that's the way to go. I'm running just ever so slightly behind. All right. 2 seconds. I'm doing things. Things are happening. Things are afoot. I'll be right there. That's the neighbor's terrible dog. I don't know if you can hear them, but that dog is evil. But not like Cujo evil, but like annoying, awful evil. Like I would be okay if, a large winged animal came down and ate the dog. All right, let's get going.
All right. Just remember what I've taught you.
What the fuck is that?
Hey, yo.
All right, I don't. Hey, hi everybody. Hello. I don't know if you can hear the dog going berserk, like a yard behind. Freakish, just small dog, just massive amounts of noise. It's yeah, it's well, thank God, because you are being spared the torture of what sounds like 1,000 accordions being thrown down a flight of stairs. Oh, and I apologize for my absence on Monday. I was fighting a head cold that may or may not have been the plague. I'm reasonably certain it was the plague, and it took like extended periods of time in order for me to feel the way I normally feel like today. So I appreciate your patience. Yeah, it sucked. If you do have the plague, and science is real because the plague exists, but if you do get the plague, the best over-the-counter thing I found to deal with all the myriad symptoms is Alka-Seltzer Cold and Sinus. Whether you get the Power Max version or not is entirely up to you. You should get it. But it's the only thing that made it bearable during the day, and it was one of the only things that helped me sleep at night. It like the largest of thumbs up in terms of over-the-counter medication rating. And it didn't have any kind of weird opiate thing, so it didn't really goof with me, which was great. But I'm back. I'm here. Here we are. It's May the 4th. Due to the ever-present threat of copyright strikes, there will be no lightsaber sounds. There will be no Akbar. There will be no Obi-Wan Kenobi. We'll just have to imagine them. Just, periodically just insert them whenever it gets quiet, much like the way we do with ads on the podcast feed. And yeah, because I was talking to somebody today who streamed for about 15 minutes. They had one lightsaber sound and they got their stream pulled. So I'd like to avoid much the same fate. Perhaps if you're on the podcast feed later, sometime this weekend, you might get something that doesn't necessarily sweat DMCA. Who knows? You'll have to go check out the podcast in order to see what you get on, say, I don't know, I think it's Sunday it's scheduled for. But that's neither here nor there. For now, here, hi, you, me, everyone around, let's go have an introduction, shall we? I'm just double checking to make sure I got all my notes. Ladies and gentlemen, guys, gals, non-binary pals, friends, writers, makers, doers, dreamers, planners, fetishists, enthusiasts, tree people, botanists, packagers, dealers, dancers, hookers, escorts, privateers, rogues, bastards, ne'er-do-wells, marchers, protesters, revolutionists. That's a word we don't use nearly enough. Enjoyers of pop culture, enjoyers of science fiction, enjoyers of fantasy, enjoyers of love, enjoyers of root beer. Anybody who can really understand the sheer joy of having a cold drink on a warm, humid day. Anybody who knows that like that middle lane is for turning when you drive. And most importantly, the comrades. Hi, hello. It is so good to be right back here with you. Through no fault of my own, I continue to be John Adamus, the writer next door. And this is the Writer's Chat for May the 4th. Please make all your appropriate Star Wars puns right now. And then we'll get started. Things have been good. Things are great. If this is the first time you're hearing this, is the first time you're checking it out. Yeah, we're doing a throwback. We're bringing back the old intro. This is the first time you're checking this out, the first time you're hearing this. Here's what this is. Over the last, now it's been 2 weeks. Week and change. I have been collecting questions from clients and writers and makers and doers and people from all across the span of everywhere and every when. All kinds of questions about writing and publishing and doing and how do I do this and how do I get published and how do I edit it, how do I market it, how do I sell it, what does this mean, what does that mean? And it is my great pleasure to bring these answers to you wherever you are, whether you are watching right now live on Twitch, or whether you are hearing about this after the fact on the podcast, or seeing it in the distant future over on YouTube when it takes a number of hours to upload, because I guess it's powered by gerbils or something, because it's still taking like 10 to 12 hours for that sucker to get to YouTube, and I wired the whole house, and apparently my upload time got slower. I don't understand how that works, but that's neither here nor there. For now, I think we just get started. I think we just start with our first question. Question number 1. How do I get past the fear that no one is going to like my writing? Now, normally, this is the sort of question that makes like gentle advice. So usually it's a 6 or a 12. But here we are. We have it at 1. Why? Because it's a big deal. Because I've heard this question from 4 different people really since last Thursday. And it's time I really say something definitive and clear about it. And that thing is this. It's up to you whether or not you get past it at all. Choosing to get past it is a huge critical step. Not too many people do that. You should do that. But by and large, the best way you can get past that fear that no one is going to like your writing is to produce a quantity of writing that you can give to other people that you might get feedback from them. Because here's the thing about feedback. I don't care whether it's feedback on a sentence, a paragraph, a page, a chapter, an act, a book, 2 books, whatever. Every time you get feedback, and I don't care from whom the feedback is, but every time you get feedback, there is a 50-50 chance that you will hear something good, or a 50-50 chance you will hear something not good. 50-50. It is not an automatic, well, I'm me and I suck, so it's going to be a problem, because that's not the case. 50-50 every time. It's either going to be this or it's going to be that. A or B. We have pretty similar 50-50 odds all throughout existence. You're not willing to do 50-50 on a thing? This is probably not the creative endeavor for you then, because you can't guarantee what somebody's going to say. You also don't know who's going to like your stuff. If you hand it to one person, and only one person, and they don't like it, yes, 100% of the people you surveyed didn't like it, but that doesn't mean 100% of the planet doesn't like it. Do you like it? Does that count? Is that enough? Could that be enough? Should that be enough? Or do we want to, go to you plus other people? If you are going to let the potential fear of someone saying something to you stop you from producing the thing you say you want to produce, how important was that production to you? If somebody's potential feedback can stop you dead in your tracks and make you regret it or make you hate it or make you uncomfortable, if someone's saying one thing based on no evidence, just on the idea of, I read this thing and I don't like it, they don't know how hard you worked. They don't know how many times you rewrote it. They don't know what you were thinking. Now, granted, maybe the thing you wrote isn't in its best shape, but that's a different argument. But I'm assuming here for the time you wrote this thing, you did your best with it. If you're going to let their dislike of a thing stop you, How important was it to you in the first place? If you make dinner for somebody, I'm going to move the camera down, airflow slightly. If you make dinner for somebody and they don't like it, does that mean you're going to give up cooking? That you're going to give up eating dinner? Why? Somebody didn't like a thing you made. I'm just taking the same logic and applying it to something else. You have to be willing to be brave, to go forward in this business, to go forward with this career, to follow your passion. You have to be willing to do that. And you can't let one person, I don't care if that person is your grandma or some major, asswipe in a suit or a spouse or a partner or a friend or whoever. If you're going to let one person derail you and that person isn't you doing the derailing, I'm going to question how serious you were about the process in the first place. Rejection is part of this business. How you handle it is up to you, but there's no automatic guarantee that you will always be rejected. I mean, if you never do anything, you will always get the worst result because nothing will happen. But that fear that no one's going to like your writing can only be tested by offering your writing to people, multiple people, and collecting a variety of opinions and seeing that maybe not all of them are bad. And if for some reason you hand it to 6 people and they all universally don't like the thing, that's not a sign that you should quit. That's a sign that you should get help with it. If I was building a house and 6 people walked by and said, John, that house is crooked, I could understand giving up and throwing down my hammer and walking away. But at the same time, if I really want to build this house, maybe it's time I go ask for some help. So how do you get past the fear? You push against it. Whether you want to take that as a challenge or not is up to you. But you choose to push past it, and you push past it. And that's how we're starting tonight. On to question 2. Question 2. Oof. How can I get better at sticking to my point of view character? Now, I'm not talking about how this is, when I say this, I mean like you're following your point of view character and everything's going along real cool. And then all of a sudden you decide narratively that you need to describe something in a totally different place, totally away from your point of view character. So just for a few sentences or words or paragraphs, you're going to dip out and go grab somebody else's point of view. That's what I mean. I'm not talking like you're in first person, then all of a sudden you go to third person. That's not sticking to your point of view either, but that's usually easier to spot because all of a sudden, instead of saying I, you started using other pronouns. But if you're following that character and you're describing things to some degree, whether you're in first person or third person, though it's more pronounced in first person, your description is limited to what that character can see and access and feel and think. The reader is, I'm making a visual, half in and half out of the narrating character in first person. In third person, they're like conjoined, they're like fused at the shoulder or something. They share, they're external, but they're close enough that some of the thoughts whisper out from the character's ear, so to speak. That's a weird analogy, John. That's not going to make any goddamn sense to people. But the idea is that the third person doesn't share 50-50 the brain space. It's just sort of broadly viewing. But how do you get better at it? Focus. Make decisions. Okay, here's my character. No matter what person I'm in, what do they see? What do they think? How do I express that to the reader? How do I write it so that if the reader were standing shoulder to shoulder, toe to toe, whatever to whatever, with the character, seeing what they see, how do I relate it to them? And you just practice the hell out of it. You're going to end up overwriting, and that's fine, because in a draft you can always cut back, you can always edit, you can always pare down. It is way better to overwrite the hell out of something, add tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of words if you want, and then cut it back, than it is to like try and juggle it or hold it in your head and then barely dole it out. You wanna overdo it so you've got the maximum number of things to cut back and adjust and tweak, as opposed to like the thinnest of breadcrumb trails. And it's just practice. You don't need to give the reader 100% total understanding of everything. There's not going to be a quiz. This isn't going to be on the final. You're not going to get a grade for this. You don't need to give the reader the 100% completion like in a video game. You need to give the reader a combination of information, stuff to picture, and emotion, stuff to feel, so that the reader can put together in their brain a movie with visuals, stuff to picture, and dialogue, stuff to hear, but also emotion and subtext, stuff to feel. And by sticking to your point of view character and having a clear idea of what that point of view character is doing, what they're after, where they're supposed to go next, why they're doing what they're doing, and being able to craft that and relay that, you will get better at writing in your point of view no matter what your point of view is. It takes practice. No one needs you to suddenly get it right this second in your first or second draft. You got plenty of time to work your way through, and you will get better at it over time if you don't give up. You'll get better over time. You just got to keep at it. Just put yourself where the character is, describe what they see, express how they feel, take a shot at it. More often than not, you're going to do fine, but you got to start from that character position. Even if you're in third person omniscient and you're God floating way overhead, trying to detail all the things, you just got to start somewhere, okay? But you do it through practice. And if you're doing one of those multiple point of view things or an A-B where you're alternating between two characters, treat it as though you've only got the one character and you're only writing this one chapter and you're only doing this one section. And then when it's time to switch, it's a totally brand new thing, even though it's in the same file. But each time you're in a point of view, that's the point of view you pay attention to. Treat them all equally and fairly as though it's the only thing in the book. It's really going to help it pull together. Good question. Love that question. Let's do what is probably the most technical question I've ever covered. It probably should have been a Monday thing all by itself, but here we go. Question number 3. How do I take all my characters from all my stories and weave them together into something I can pitch or sell well? Okay. So there's one collective name for this, and that's called interconnected world or interconnected world theory or interconnected strategy. It's all the same thing. That idea fundamentally is you have a story, and the story is part of a greater universe where you've got characters from this book and characters from that book and characters from this book over here and characters from that book over there. And even though they're in separate books, because you're writing them all and they more or less overlap to some degree, like they're all in the same genre, or maybe some characters from one book kind of make appearances in other books, it helps it feel sort of greater and bigger than just one book and greater and bigger than just one or two characters. Everything you've crafted becomes its own little cinematic universe that we can marvel at. You get what I'm saying? How do you do that? How do you make that? How do you make that work? There are some steps. Step number 1, independent of how you write the books. This is we're going to put the manuscript itself to one side. We are going to look at only the notes, only the guts, only the stuff of the story, okay? Here's what you're going to need. Now, you have a choice. You can do this on a book-by-book basis and then connect the dots. Or, what is more commonly done, you list everybody. You're going to make a list of characters. And it doesn't matter what book they're in. It doesn't matter, if you're talking about book 1 next to book 16 or whatever. You're going to make a list of all your characters. And I'm talking major characters here. So your primary characters, your main characters, your point of view characters, the big guys in the story, protagonist, antagonist alike, okay? I'm not talking like Susie, the lady who does the dry cleaning in book 6. Even if Susie shows up every time, I'm focus on the majors first, okay? Focus on the majors first. List them by name. List them if they have a function in the story, list them by function. A function in the story would be they're the protagonist, they're the antagonist. If you want to go even further and do function and then do role in the story, so you might have Kevin, protagonist. He's a disgraced financial whiz. Now, why is that important? That's important because you need to know who the hell he is. And you need to be able, in one space, one document, one file, one something, be able to get a snapshot of your characters. It's not enough just to go, here are my 15 protagonists. Go. You need to do more than that. So we need to know what it is these people do and who they are. So that way you don't suddenly end up with your protagonist from one book suddenly hanging out with your antagonist of another, and it's clearly not necessary for the story. If we're using a comic book example, I'm going to sneeze. Hang on. If we're using a comic book example, you wouldn't, for instance, suddenly grab your Dr. Doom and have him hang out with the X-Men. It just, no. You want to keep these things organized and separate when they need to be separate, but merge them when they need to be merged. Now we're going to take it one step further. So we've got a character by name, their function, and their role. Okay. Now we're going to go one step further. This is important because now we're going to start figuring out what the connective tissue could be for these characters. In whatever book the character is in, so Kevin, our disgraced financial wizard, or let's say we have, I don't know, we have Tom, the down on his luck mercenary. I don't know. I'm just making shit up. We have to look and see what their arc is in whatever book where they're the main character. So in the Kevin story where he's a disgraced financial wizard, what's his arc? His arc could be he's got to clear his good name and come to terms with his shady past. Let's just paint by numbers because it's an example, right? We write that down. We write the arc down. Do we need to break it into more detail? Maybe, but if we do need to do more detail, we can do it elsewhere. But for now, we just need to be able to have a snapshot. We're making a little roadmap here. We're making a little detail here. Okay, this is what's going on. This is what Kevin's about. And we do that for all our characters, however many we have. Now, if you're thinking, oh my God, I have so many characters, that might be a sign that you might have to actually pare down some characters. There might just be a lot of them. There might be too many, and you might have to make some decisions. Well, I don't really need Steve, do I? Nah, Steve can go. But that decision's yours. There's no magic number here. It's not like 6 is suddenly, super duper better than 4 and less good than 10 or something. The number is up to you, depending on what you can handle, given the size of everything. If we're talking about Marvel, you're already in, double digits. And that works because of the number of pieces involved. But if you're looking at something like you only have 4 books, but you've got 15 people, oh, well, if you're just trying to tell a story where it's 2 people at a time, who knows who they are, then it might really be a thing. So don't do that. What you have to do when you have the arc for the character, whomever they might be, is see which other stories, in addition to their own, some part of that arc, because it's not going to be the full one, because if you want the full one, you're going to go to their specific book. So let's use a Marvel example in case you're unclear. We have Iron Man, right? Iron Man's arc across the 3 Iron Man movies is to come to terms with who he is, transform from who he was, and accept the mantle of being a hero. 3 movies. At any time when some of those elements of accepting the mantle of hero and putting away his past and all that, if at any time those elements can also be referenced in other things, like let's say hypothetically we didn't, but let's say hypothetically they decided to do the Fantastic Four earlier, and their idea of accepting the mantle of being heroes after being hit by cosmic rays from space, you could find an intersection point between where Iron Man is accepting the mantle of a hero and the Fantastic Four is accepting a mantle of hero. And that you'd have a reason then to put Iron Man in your Fantastic Four story. Or if we're going back to our Kevin and Tom example, Kevin, the disgraced financial whiz, can suddenly realize that in order to make amends for his past, he has to offer free financial services to people. And here's the Tom, the down on his luck mercenary, who needs help with his taxes. There's a natural, regular in-story point where one character can extend aid or benefit narratively, not just to a plot, but also to an arc, for the benefit of another character. If you're not able to build reasonable connections between characters, if you have to stretch, if it's this really pronounced thing where all of a sudden you're inventing extra characters or extra supportive reasons as if we all really care, like, oh yeah, they share a backstory. They're brothers from another mother who they once sat next to each other on a train on a Tuesday when it was cloudy out. The more elaborate and bullshitty your reason for putting the one character into another character's story is, the more transparent it comes across that you don't know why. You just feel this need to make all these characters exist in the same world. You don't have to go that far, though. You don't have to go to that level of detail in order to reference other characters. Because now we're going to add another tool to this toolbox. We're going to add another layer to this. Let's suppose we have our character list, we have our arcs, so we have a way of creating and manufacturing intersections between characters. But let's suppose we didn't only want to like shoehorn in, Kevin into Tom's story. What else could we do? Well, we could take an event from one story and reference it in another. Now, if you overdo this, it feels really convenient and a little sloppy, like you couldn't come up with your own ideas, so you're stealing one from yourself. So you don't want to make a habit of doing this like all the time. But periodically, it can be very helpful to go, okay, this event that happened in Kevin's book, let's mention it in Tom's. Again, we're going to use a Marvel example. So if you're one of like 3 humans on the planet who wasn't aware, in one of the later Avengers movies, there's an event called The Blip, where Thanos wipes away for several years half the population. That blip is referenced then in other films, Spider-Man in particular, because it was immediately thereafter, but also later on in general. We don't need a crash course in it. We don't need it over hyper explained to us, but it can be referenced, and then the rest of the story moves on. We don't bring the one story to a halt to explain why we're bringing in this stuff from this other story, because that's not how the world works. If I were to explain to you that I know 2 different people, I don't suddenly stop my one explanation to bring in somebody else, even if it's me giving the most rambling explanation ever. But we find ways and elements from one story to connect to the elements of another story so that both share something in common. If you're only building a character-to-character relationship, which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that, but it is going to be weaker and feel more convenient than if it is a character and a world thing. Because if you want to suggest that all these characters live in the same town, or they all, go to the same diner, or they're all part of the same like sphere of stories, you need more than just characters showing up in each other's stories. You need also the world to be shared by them. And that's not the same as just having like, oh, you bought shoes, I own shoes. It's, you've got to go to the specific shoe place in town. Not at the same time. You don't need one character to hold the door for the other. Hello, I'm Tom. I'm the guy holding the door at the shoe store. You don't need to make it obvious. But at the same time, you need to make sure elements from one story's world, as if it existed all by itself, show up in another story's world, as if it existed all by itself. And then all of a sudden, the 2 things coexist. You don't need to go out of your way. You don't need to over-explain it. You can use, what you reference in one story can be explained in the second story, so that over the course of multiple stories, we learn the backstory about the shoe place in town. But you don't have to do that. It's nice when you do, but it's not critical. But if you're trying to weave all these things together, it's not enough just to do characters, and it's not enough just to do plot. I'm looking at you, Thor 2, The Dark World. It's got to be a little bit of world, and a little bit of character, and a little bit of character arc from all the different sources you want to pull. Now, natural question is, how many of these can I do at a single time? And the answer is far fewer than you think. Why? Because the more people you crowd into one story, the slower that story's plot gets, because all of a sudden we are juggling a high number of characters. We don't want to be juggling a high number of characters just whatever. Remember, you don't know when or if the reader's going to read or engage with those other things. You might have it all out there, but if your reader reads the stuff out of some order, like let's say you have, 4 books, 1, 2, 3, 4, but for whatever reason, they only buy book 2 and they start with book 2 because, I don't know, your purveyor of choice didn't have any more book 1s. I don't know. Or book 1 was more expensive or whatever. If they read it out of order, you don't want them denied a complete story. It'll be complete as itself, and it'll be more complete. Does that make sense? It'll be more complete when they read more things. Again, to use a Marvel example, you can watch any single Marvel movie in theory and get get a base level story and a base level of enjoyment, but it suddenly matters more and feels more substantial and feels more engaging because you're carrying with it the baggage of all the other stuff. But in theory, you should be able to take any part of a series, any book in a world, any set of things, look at it individually, consume it, enjoy it, understand it, and then everything else that supports it and goes around it just adds to that after the fact. It should not be required for a reader to forcibly engage with 7 books in order to get the picture you intend. That's the fear traditional publishers have when people are like, this is the first book of an 11-book series, and it has lots of series potential, because you're freaking them out, man. Readers don't necessarily read in order. They don't necessarily get access to materials in order, and it shouldn't be on them to do that kind of heavy lifting. So in terms of how you can pitch it or sell it well, treat each book as though it's its only thing. Treat each book like it's not hypercritical and dependent, that you understand that 3 characters mentioned in chapter 9 are, the main characters of another story. But if you need everything, if you need to get it right, you got to go read their book too. Don't make it so inter-story dependent. One story at a time, built to the best of its ability, that references or connects or shares elements with other stories is enough. And then it just comes down to pitching and selling well, which is stuff we've covered in lots of different places in lots of different ways, and stuff's available on the YouTube channel and the podcast feed. But you want to be careful with how you weave them together and how much you weave at a time. It takes practice. Nobody gets it right the first time. It does get easier over time, but it comes down to planning that you do up front. Okay? Great question. Let's switch tracks slightly. Are there any questions from chat? I'm double checking my phone to make sure that, yeah, we're good. Questions? Tonight's tea, by the way, is hibiscus. It's like drinking a flower pot. It's not bad. It's not as strong as I want, but it's okay. And I know you were going to ask, because I don't know, man. Like, it's one of the things everybody asks now. I got asked that. So I was in a meeting today, and we were talking about something else, and I wasn't even on camera, and somebody totally was like, "What tea are you having today?" I'm like, "Oh, this morning I had green." I was just very surprised. I guess when you get known for things, people ask. So the question over here is that why people have story Bibles for their series? It's one of the reasons why they have story Bibles. It's not the only reason. It's one of the things a story Bible can do. A story Bible is if you don't know what that is, a story Bible is basically a big giant file, whether it's a spreadsheet or a bunch of spreadsheets or a note file or just a big Word doc or who knows what, a big file folder, whatever, that collects all your related story information, who your characters are, what their arcs are, what the world's like, what the book plot is, what the other plots are. It collects all your story information. And in a series, they're critical, especially when your series gets beyond like 2 or 3 books, and you've got to juggle like loads of chronology or loads of detail. One of the things it allows you to do is be able to pull from earlier books into later books and say, oh, well, we haven't talked about this character in 4 books. Time to bring him in. Or it helps you also reference, like, what was the rule I wrote about how this thing works? I want to make sure I'm consistent. Story Bibles are absolutely critical for series authors. If you ever decide to traditionally publish a series, while it's not necessary or specific that somebody's going to say, like, hi, I'm a publisher, please give me your series Bible, it certainly will do you a huge favor, a big gold star, in having that material available for publication and organization and editing. If you're going to self-publish it, it does not necessarily always help your editor, depending on what your editor is doing. Like if you've got a copy editor, you mainly might only want to give them like a list of names so they spell things correctly. But if you've got like a developmental editor and you've got multiple plates spinning, it might be useful to give them a list of notes, or give them a phone call or something. Hey, here's the list of characters, or can we just walk through the plot or something? More information is always better at that level of editing, but by and large, if you're putting this out yourself and your editing is pretty light in terms of just like a copy edit and then some quick proofing and a couple beta readers and slap that shit out there because you're racing to publishing, a story Bible is not necessarily the best tool for you. And for a lot of writers, crafting that story support document, whether it's a story Bible or a big index or a wiki or who knows what, it's just another way of giving yourself a reason not to finish. Oh, I'll publish the book, but first I got to do the wiki. First I got to make this. First I got to do that. No one's asking for it. You don't need to make it. It's just a stall. So be careful in making them, but they can be very useful. Great question. Anybody else? How important, hang on, I want to put this on the screen. How important are conlangs in fantasy and sci-fi? I'm shrugging. It depends on how you're using them. They don't have to, they're not, the world's not going to come to a screeching halt. If you lack them, or they're poorly defined, or they're otherwise non-existent, you can, like any other tool in the toolbox, your varied use of them does not necessarily make or break unless you completely miss the point. Like if you tank that thing, yeah, it's a big deal and it's going to be noticeable. But you don't have to go out of your way to produce them. How do I say this? I guess if you're really dying for them, like, oh my God, John, I've got this conlang, I super need it. If you're really dying to like make alternate, a conlang, if you don't know, is a constructed language. I realize I'm talking about this thing and I haven't defined it. If you don't know what a conlang is, it's a made up language. It's how we get Klingon and stuff, and Elvish and all that, and Simlish and whatever. You don't have to have especially, you don't need to like throw, back in the day, you used to have to you didn't have to, you were strongly encouraged to produce like an index or an appendix where you could list like popular Orcish phrases. That's how Klingon got its own dictionary, and then it got translated into Shakespeare and stuff. It was just common little phrases and throwaways and footnotes, and it sort of took off. It used to be a novelty. It used to be a real big selling point. Narratively, though, unless you club the reader over the head with it and make a point of talking about how the lack of language commonality or the distinction of it is a real problem for the story, it's possible that you're just making a thing to make a thing, and you're going to be the only one really excited about it. I can tell you that in the world of Dune, there are whole academic articles on the nature of some of the cultures, and the only people who seem really jazzed about that are the people who wrote the papers. But they're not critical reading. It's not like, oh God, if you really want to get this story, you got to read that guy's dissertation. I mean, you can, but it's not the end of the world if you decide, hey, you know what? I'd much rather like do my laundry. So I can indicate characters are speaking other languages with different dialogue tags and italics. Yes, you can always do that. A real common thing in fantasy is when you have a fantasy race that speaks its own fantasy language, like dwarves. Dwarf X says in Dwarvish, comma, quotation, blah. And the line is written in English because the reader doesn't speak Dwarvish. And then if you want to comment on the nature of the language that the dwarf just said, you want to describe the mouth sound and phonemes of it, then you would write a sentence to describe the heavy guttural sounds, fell out of his, jowls with force. Or that's a terrible sentence. Don't do it that way. But you get what I'm saying? Like you don't need to like stop and put it in parentheses. Please don't do that. That's a nightmare. But you can use dialogue tags, italics. Italics is a questionable one because there's that real world issue of, hey, we don't italicize a foreign earth language. You can make an argument that you shouldn't italicize a foreign fantasy or sci-fi language. That's a very good question. I don't have a good answer on that part. I would err on the side of not italicizing a foreign language because foreign, it means it's foreign to the reader. I would err on the side of not italicizing that, but I guarantee you if you were to ask me that question tomorrow, I may give you a different answer. But for now, you can rely on dialogue tags, sentence construction, other notations. You don't have to go out of your way to like craft grammar for a different language. I mean, if you want to, I know how. It's not very fun. Nobody really enjoys like my random academic digressions into crafting new grammar rules. It's not really gonna light your dance card up. But if you really wanted to go that far, I guess you could. But you don't have to. It's not like your book's gonna live and die by it. Good question. I'm still gonna think about the italics though. That's a really good point. I as I was saying it out loud, it occurred to me. I just have this feeling that Conlangs would be a world-building trap I'd fall into. Oh, they can totally be a trap. They can absolutely be a trap because you know how much work it takes to make a language? Whole civilizations live and die by their language. And those are like humans doing human things on a human planet. Imagine trying to like make up new rules for random fish people. No, thank you. Just tell the story. Oh, no, I could not. No, please don't make your own language up, sir. Don't, buddy. Don't. Come on. You'll be fine. Don't do that. If you're going to do it in bits and pieces, like a little word here and a little word there and a little thing over, cool. But you don't have to go all the way in. Unless you've got like a lot of free time and like a lot of good Patreon support, I guess, where you can afford to be like, I'm taking 6 months to make a language. Because it's going to take weeks. But I can't recommend it as like a casual, hey, boy, howdy, I'm telling a story. Don't drive yourself crazy with it. No good comes from falling into that trap. Good question, though. Anything else? I do have one note right here. I want to thank whoever gave me several stars on Podchaser. You didn't leave your name, but thanks so much for checking out the podcast. It was a very nice comment. I really appreciate it. You also spelled my name correctly, so cool. Thank you, person. All right, on we go. Question number 4. Where do I start my synopsis? The smartass answer is at the top of the page. But I think what you're asking is, where do I start my synopsis narratively? At the beginning of the story. Depending on the model of synopsis you're using, there are specific things to look for at the beginning of your synopsis. If you are, like me, of an older vintage of writer and book person, you may remember that some synopses used to come in these very structured template styles where you'd have paragraphs and topic headings, section for this, section for that, section for this, section for that. That's the old model. Still viable, but it's old-fashioned. In that case, if you're still doing that model, and honestly, I'm not sure why you are, but let's suppose hypothetically you were like, John, I was Googling and I found some shit from way back in the day. And I mean like pre-internet back in the day. But okay, let's suppose you want to try this real rigid structured model out that nobody knows what that looks like anymore because they don't teach it anymore. Your first section would be on general attitude and format and theme. You'd be talking about how the world feels, how the story, what the vibe is, how you can connect and look at your characters. This is where you'd put your comps if you're going to, with comps or anything, you'd talk about the overall mood. That was the big word in the 60s and 70s. The mood of the book. And then you'd get into the chapter by chapter breakdown. In a more modern construction of a synopsis, start at the beginning of the book. How does it start? What's our first scene? How do we meet our characters? How does the book kick off? How does the book grab our attention? Because remember, a synopsis is basically an adult book report. We're just looking to summarize and recap and titillate to a lesser degree than marketing. So we're not trying to convince you to buy, convince you to hey, come check out the manuscript. Here's the short version. That's like suggesting that the Cliff Notes make you want to go buy the whole book. Not designed to work that way. The synopsis's function is to be read in place of the manuscript by those people willing to make publishing decisions. Like if you submit your book and it goes off into the world of publication and you're told, hey, I need a synopsis along with it, it's because some people are going to read the manuscript and other people in the meeting will have read the synopsis. And that way, everybody knows what the hell your book's about, but only some people have more detail. This is because a lot of people in these meetings won't have time to read, let's say, 45 submissions all at once in time for the meeting to begin. It's a pain in the ass, so the synopsis saves them a bit of time. But you want to start your synopsis where the book starts and walk your way and work your way through from beginning to end. Top of the page, top of the book. Here we go. Let's go. Boom, 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 boom. Scene, 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 scene. Arc, 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 arc. Just summarize that sucker. Just like a book report. It really can be that simple. It's just a pain in the ass, and nobody likes them. But here we are still doing them. Why is that? I don't know. But here we are still making them. God, that sucks. But that's where you start your synopsis. Let me go to the next one. Question number 5. I got told I'm overwriting the dialogue. Yep, that's a thing that happens. What does that mean? Okay, it means 2 things. 1, it means that you literally have too many words coming out of your characters' mouths. They're saying too many words. 2, the words and the quantity of words that they are saying do not sound the way people would talk to each other if we overheard their conversation just on the other side of my office door. If we went outside and saw your 2 characters talking, they wouldn't sound like regular people. And 2, in addition to having weird construction where everything feels very stiff and very all of a sudden very formal, and additionally, it's because probably your character is over-explaining things to people who don't need that stuff explained to them. So, for instance, if you and I, let's say we go get lunch together. I don't know, it could happen. Well, you and I go get lunch, and we're sitting there. You would not turn to me and go, "Hey, John, did you enjoy the lunch we just had together?" We just walked out of the place to get lunch. You don't need to use the words, "Did you enjoy the lunch we just had?" We just had it. I didn't suddenly forget. Neither of us had some kind of weird stroke or amnesia. So it's not like you need to say the words, "Did you enjoy the lunch we just had?" when we just enjoyed lunch. That's what overwriting is. It's that combination of weird, stiff, strange construction, but also over-explaining things that if it were out loud from real people to real people, you wouldn't say that. That doesn't sound right. Likewise, too, it also may indicate that you are saying the plot to other characters. Hi, what we need to do right now is go over here and then do this and then do this, and I need to get a Christmas gift, and then I need to buy a card because Christmas is coming. Yeah, you think the people in the rest of the story don't know that, like, Christmas is at the end of the book? Like, you don't need to over-explain everything. Characters in world know what's going on in the world. If they don't, they'll talk about it or they will experience it. But you don't need to over-explain it. A real common problem here is that people will say things like, well, the reader doesn't know. Imagine the face. See this face? See this? That's the face. That's the thing that happens. Because the problem is, you don't have to tell the reader through dialogue what's going on. The reader should be able to gather some portion of that. Honestly, it should be more than 50%, but some portion of that, over 50%, from the context of the whole scene. You should not be counting on it, relying on your dialogue to do all the information getting, all the information broadcasting to your reader. That's, no, don't do that. Go sit in the corner and think about what you've done. Like, just like plot doesn't live in dialogue, over-explaining becomes unnecessary in dialogue. It's dialogue plus context. Treat your reader like they're smart enough to be able to remember what they just read 2 sentences ago, and a lot of this will, work itself out. And yes, here's a very important point. If the reader doesn't know, it's because you failed to tell them, which is a very good point. Because then, just to be fair, that does not mean you have to tell them explicitly. But they should be able to use their reading skills that we all learned in Mrs. Finley's first grade class. And, okay, so maybe you weren't all in my first grade class, but she was a little old lady who explained to me that, like, you should be able to look at all the parts of the story and be able to, by the end of the story, know everything. No one sentence, John, is going to tell you everything. You have to read the whole story. So let your reader read the whole story. Mrs. Finley has been dead maybe 30-something years. I do not remember her first name. For all I know, her first name was Mrs. Maybe I'll text my mom. She might know Mrs. Finley's first name. Some of us aren't that old. Yeah, well, go kick rocks. All right? Go kick rocks. I will end up texting my mom to figure out what Mrs. Finley's first name was. I bet it was something really old-fashioned like Doris or something. But that's neither here nor there. All right, on we go. Can't believe you're not that old. That's an atrocity. I'm just ancient. Gentle advice. Speaking of old, gentle advice, question number 6. At 55, am I too old to get published? No. You can get published at any age. Now, there are going to be some sources out there. There are going to be some people, some experts who will tell you that publishing is a young person's game, and that if you're this old or that old or whatever, that you shouldn't bother because you're old and automatically somehow out of touch, which is not true. There's no reason to automatically assume that just because you're 55, you've suddenly stopped, like, living on planet Earth. Now, I know. We can all imagine a subset of people who are 55 or older who seem to be completely out of touch with the way the world works in terms of the fact that, like, some humans are humans or that they have the ability to legislate other people's lives or bodies. I know, but that's because when at a certain age they consumed a lot of lead-based things and they were exposed to a lot of chemicals that have solidified in their brains and made it harder for their brain to make electrical connections. So they're old and slowly shorting out, and they're going to be dead soon, comrades. I cannot wait. But all the same, they're not automatically, like, disqualified from knowing shit. That doesn't make them experts. But you can get published at any age so long as you do the things that'll get you published, meaning you tell the story to the best of your ability, you jump through all the hoops for traditional publishing, or you produce all the material you need to produce for self-publishing. You could do it at any age. One of the things that loves to get bandied around social media is the idea that certain authors, like Raymond Chandler, didn't get published until he was well into his late 40s, early 50s, as if that's somehow supposed to tell you that you, the person reading this, who's probably not in their late 40s or 50s, all of a sudden has time in order to craft your story. It's not a goddamn race. You can be any age and produce art. Some artists, granted they were pieces of shit, did produce art well into their 70s, 80s, and 90s. Then they died. But age is not a barrier to art production. Age is not a barrier to publication. There are some people who will tell you it is because they don't want to, like, deal with it. I don't know. But you can publish. I mean, you can publish it. It's going to be the same road as everybody else. That doesn't make it any harder. It doesn't disqualify you. But you can get published at 55. Same that somebody that, is 15 can get published. It might be, 15 is kind of tough because you'll need like somebody to sign your paperwork for you because you're 15. But yeah, you can get published. Totally fine. Don't let your age stop you. Tell a good story. Feed your art. Are there any more questions about anything? Including and not limited to how I feel about old people in charge of the country. I'm more than happy to rage against the machine. I didn't get a chance to rage today. I was busy editing things. It's going well, by the way. I don't have any hell babies. When you say feed your art, what do you mean? That's a great question here. We're going to put that up on screen. Here's what feed your art means. Feed your art refers to the idea that every day you should be doing something to help move you one or more steps forward towards your creative goal. So it comes from the idea of sourdough bread. I don't know if you've ever made sourdough bread, but it requires this thing called a starter, which is essentially just moldy shit in a jar. And it's this roiling mass of flour and water. And it becomes the basis of your dough. And you have to feed it periodically because it's a living thing. Bread is alive until you murder it via baking. But you have to feed it so that it continues to grow so that you can continue to use it. You have to feed your starter so that it might become bread. You have to feed your lawn that it might grow. You have to feed, your pets that they might thrive. You have to feed yourself that you may continue to live. You have to provide material to it to allow it to go forward towards whatever its goal might be. You have to feed your art. You've got to do something every day in order to make it one step closer towards your goal. Now, some people take that to mean you have to write every day. That is one way to feed your art. It is not the only way to feed your art. Maybe another way to feed your art is catching up on your sleep, self-care. That'll help you feed your art because then you won't be so goddamn exhausted. Maybe it's, buying a water bottle so you can stay better hydrated. Maybe it's feeding your art by reading more books that you've been putting off, or talking to writers about actual materially important things like, hey, do you want to get together and swap notes, as opposed to one of those inane #writing community questions that get you nowhere and do nothing for you. You feed your art by supplying it with nutrients to allow it to grow and further and let you go forward. Because if you feed it garbage or you starve it, it becomes harder to produce better art. So if you're not feeding your art consistently, the creative muscles essentially atrophy. They slack off. You lose some of that discipline. You lose some of that focus. And you want to be able to consistently invest in it because it matters to you, because you matter overall. So your ability to feed your art is your ability to sustain that creativity in some way. It doesn't always mean you have to write every day. It could also be, the well-roundedness of your creativity. Make sure you're reading, make sure you're resting, make sure you're, thinking, make sure you're consuming other media, make sure you're avoiding certain media if you need to, but do what you can to help make your art more possible. That's what feeding your art is. All right. Ooh, an outlining question. Have I/could I talk about strategies for outlining? My current approach, I'm doing point form, then expanding each point pass after pass. Yes, that is a strategy for outlining. I think I've covered outlining in bits and pieces across multiple chats. I do not think I've ever had like one deep dive Monday night video on outlining. I know I've covered it on Twitter way back in the day before Twitter was shit. But I can cover some outlining points for you now. Literally anything that helps you organize your story, that allows you to look at something in a snapshot and have a rough idea of what it is you need to do, is a valid outline. Whether that's bullet points or the old-fashioned Roman system with the Roman numerals and the capital letters, or a web design, or the snowflake outline, or just a numbered sequence of things, or note cards, or color-coded dots. You would love a Monday on an outline? Hey, guess what we're going to do Monday? Making myself a note. Where's my notepad? Outlining. It's going to be real nerdy, right? Just so we're clear. It's going to be like technical. I'll make graphics. It'll be a thing. But yeah, anything that counts as outlining, that helps you look at your story and know what you've done, know what you need to do, and know what... I did an outline on a Monday 8 months ago. You nerd. It's nice that I have a body of work now that can be referenced. Maybe I'll just do another. Maybe I'll expand on it. I don't remember 8 months ago. God, how sad is that? It's okay. Nerdy is excellent. Love a good nerdy. Yeah, we can get into it. I'll come up. I'll put together some notes over the weekend. I've got editing to do. It's on YouTube. Of course, it's on YouTube. All my stuff's on YouTube. That's the whole point of putting it on YouTube. But yes, outlines. It's a thing. Congrats on being dubbed a nerd. I love you all. Have some air horns. All right. Yes, we can talk about outlining, but there's no wrong way to outline. It's only wrong if it doesn't help you do it. Like if it makes it more complicated, or if it gets in the way, or you suddenly start feeling like you need to perfect the outline in order to perfect the work. Yes, prolific. That is one way to put it, sure. But by and large, whatever method for outlining works for you. There are some outlining tools that skew more towards favorable character development, and some outlining methods that skew more towards developing better plot. And there are some outlining methods that skew more towards just vomiting your ideas out onto the page so they don't just live in your brain. So there are pros and cons to damn near every outlining model. But that doesn't mean that there's like real writers use a real outline. Who gives a shit? Use an outline. You should outline, period. I don't care how, but you should do it, because it's going to make a difference between figuring it out on the fly and having inconsistencies, or running into really weak development because you're just making it up as you go, versus making decisions in advance and then following your own goddamn decisions. But yes, apparently 8 months ago on YouTube, I talked about outlining, and we will talk about outlining some more on this coming Monday. Neat. Thanks, because now I don't have to worry about it stressing over a topic tomorrow. Rad. You guys are the best. Love this community. Other questions? If, just out of curiosity, not curiosity, it's just a follow-up. If the point expansion model that you're using is working for you, keep doing it. If you're finding it lacking because it's skewing one way or the other, you find yourself using it and it seems to be steering you in one, like, I'm getting really good notes on the world building, but I'm getting like no growth whatsoever on arcs. That's not necessarily a sign that your model of outlining needs to change. It just means you need to sit down and make more decisions about the stuff you're otherwise lacking. because any kind of outlining can be tailored to accommodate any kind of story. You just have to make more notes. But we can totally talk more outlining. Hell yeah. Nerdy, prolific, nerdy, dorky writing things make me very happy. Because I can sit here with like a root beer and just walk you through how to make things. It's very enjoyable for me. Let's totally do that. That sounds great. Good stuff. That's my plan because I don't know what we... All right, hang on. Everybody stop. Where's my... Stop. I don't buy for a hot second. Where's my... Hang on. I don't buy for a hot second that you don't know what you're doing. That sounds to me an awful lot like you're trying to give yourself an out for a thing that doesn't need an out. If you are producing your own stuff and you've been writing consistently-ish, and it seems to be producing a volume of material, then you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. The unspoken part of what you said is, I don't know if what I'm doing is any good. Fun fact, while you're making a thing, you're not going to know if it's any good. You won't know until somebody else looks at it when it's done, which is why it's so important for you to finish the thing you were doing. Because if you don't finish it, no one's going to be able to tell if it was good because it's incomplete. So I understand feeling like you don't know what you're doing, but if you're doing something, then you're doing enough. It won't let you link my outlining vid? Ad timing. Oh, you jerks. That's all right. I'll just keep talking. Is it a 30-second? I didn't press the button. Ads are not my thing. Also, if you just subscribe, you won't get ads, and that way I'll be able to feed my cats. But now at least we know you get ads. So we've learned a very important thing. We know you don't pay for this, and we know we want my cats to starve. How dare you? All right, so while he's over there, thank you for subscribing. While he's over there murdering my cats, don't murder my cats, man. You know plenty what you're doing, and you can always ask questions. It won't let you post a link at all? I will tweak that. People should be able to post links. I think I've got on there's a no-fly link list, like you can't do porn because Twitch will yell at me. But I'll fix that. That will get fixed. I can't do it on the fly while I'm recording because it's like a stack of menus and I got to stand there and make a face. But we fix that. Making a note. Fix your links. All right. Weird. Anyway. Yeah. You know what you're doing. You're doing something, so keep doing it. You'll know you're doing it well when other people see it when it's done, so finish. And if you're not sure, if you need some help, if you're unsure what you feel like you're dog paddling in the dark in a hurricane, get help. And if you out there are listening and you don't know where to go for help and you don't want to pay for it, writernextdoor.com. Click on the top of the page. You can book a free appointment. And then I, for free, will help you. And at least give you some kind of vector or roadmap to help you out. But I guarantee you, you know what you're doing. You're just unsure if it's any good, but you won't know until later. So keep going. You're probably doing fine. And even if it's not any good now, you can always make it better later. So you can't really lose so much as it just takes a while to get where you want it to be. Good question, though. Why? Yeah, I can't do it I tried doing it from my phone. I can't do it from my phone. I will deal with the link situation later. All right, on we go. Let's see. What question do we leave off with? Are we on 7 now? Question 7. Do you agree with the idea that whatever you're writing reveals who you are? Yes, I do agree with that idea. Now, some people take this idea to mean that if you're writing science fiction, you're a certain kind of nerd. Or if you're writing romance, you are sexually unsatisfied. That was a long-standing one. Or if you're writing fantasy novels, you're a Satanist. That's part of the Satanic Panic. That's not that's not accurate. That's not entirely grounded in any kind of reality. But what you write and how you write it does speak to who you are. So if you start talking about a thing and your characters consistently condemn it, unless you personally have established elsewhere your very clear stance. Like, you believe X and all your characters believe Y. And it's not because that transformation or that arc is part of the story, it's just a statement they're making. Then in the absence of that contradictory or opposing information, it can be reasonably said that, oh, well, you must condone this because you write this, because you say this. There is something to it, because if you're putting it onto the page and you're not looking to challenge it or subvert it or do something with it, it had to show up there somehow. I'm looking at you, famous lady writer who has a strong anti-trans stance, and it's been there the entire goddamn time because you're, not exactly reinventing the wheel. What you write and how you write, what you call obscene, what you say is dirty, what you say is interesting, the way you frame a shot, the way you describe a thing, the number of times you use a certain word, the number of ways you attach adverbs to everything, all that stuff speaks to who you are because it's part of your decision-making process. If you're somebody who wants to constantly attach adverbs to things, it suggests something about you. If you tend to have real run-on sentences with loads of commas, it suggests something about your nervousness or your anxiety. If you tend to use very staccato, fragmentary sentences, real short bursts, it speaks to, what you're trying to say and the rush you might be in. These things it reveals may not be accurate at first glance, but it's at least something, a clue. Something to investigate, a lead. But I do think that what you're writing, not just bound by genre, but also theme and story. If you're somebody who writes a lot of stories about found family, it is reasonable, I think, to conclude that perhaps you personally have some kind of issues around found families. Maybe you just really like them because you find them comforting. Maybe, like me, you're somebody who, typically has trouble making their way through stories with dads in them, because they're almost always either things I can sympathize with or things I would desperately want. It's just part of that. So yeah, I do think that what you're writing, whatever it is, reveals something about you. For good or for ill, intentionally or otherwise. I don't think that's a reason enough, though, to stop and scrub it out of your writing and try to hide it. I think that's cowardly. I think that's a little disingenuous. I think you should be proud of who you are. I think you should own your identity, whatever it might be, whomever you might be, however you identify. I think you should put that shit on a big giant flag and wave it. And let your art be your art, and let your art be one of your many mouthpieces out into the world. I just think it's worth it. Because how else is that going to happen? You should wave your flag a lot, aggressively, because it's not going to wave nearly as well in somebody else's hands. So yeah, I do think what you write reveals something about you. Good question. Question number 8. I tend to overuse adverbs. How can I stop doing this? Step 1, stop writing adverbs. I mean, the flippant answer is stop writing adverbs. It's never that straightforward, because what happens is this idea that the adverb, the ly word most frequently, is somehow making the thing you're saying clearer. He ran quickly. He said coldly. She blurted out hurriedly or something. We're modifying speed or time or something, or we're modifying temperature, or we're modifying mode, or we're affecting something. And somehow that's supposed to clarify the thing to some degree. The problem with that is it's still really subjective, because if you say he walked quickly to the phone, your intended definition of quickly might be different than the reader's perception of quickly. And honestly, do you really want to get into like a semantic, logistical argument about, oh, well, he did it in 3 strides. No, he did it in 2.63 strides. Like, who cares as to the exact degree of something? The adverb is still vague. It's still subjective to some degree. He said coldly. Relative to what? How? How much cold? Where was the inflection? Where was the tone? Was it coldly because of the word? Was it coldly because of the sound? Was it coldly because of the look? What part was cold? Be careful with your adverbs, because while you may believe they are doing something to better explain an idea, what they might be doing is concealing or hiding or messing or blurring up some other idea. Because you might say something like, he said coldly, and then the dude delivers the line. But you might mean there's also a face involved that you want the character to make. You want the reader to picture in their head. Maybe it's tight-lipped and looked down or something. I don't know. There's some additional information. It's not just sound. Well, you have a responsibility to put those words and that picture in their head, so you need to do more than just rely on the adverb. The other issue, if you find you're overusing them over and over and over and over again as frequently as possible all the time, look at your verbs, because adverbs modify verbs. That's verb is in the word. So the adverb reflects on the verb it modifies. If you need to constantly keep using adverbs to clarify the verb isn't strong enough. He walked quickly. Well, how is a quick walk different than a jog or different than a run? And don't confuse run with sprint when I say that, because run has a whole variety of connotations. My neighbor across the street runs, but my neighbor down the street jogs. There are 2 different rates at which they move, and one of them does look like a quick walk, but you could argue that one is jogging and one is running. They're stronger verbs. Look to your verb to see if you can eliminate the adverb. Now, that doesn't mean you go crazy with the verb and you dig out the thesaurus and all of a sudden, like, your seds turn into pontificate or bloviate or something like that. Like, you don't want to go archaic with your verb just because you don't want to say said for the umpteenth billion time. But if you can modify the verb to better impart the idea to the reader, change the verb, ditch the adverb. A lot of times that adverb is just kind of dangling out there, and you can cut it and let the context of the situation and the words in the dialogue, for instance, do that heavy lifting. Let the other words around it do their job. The adverb is often in the way. But it comes down to practice. One of the things I recommend for writers who tend to really, really love adverbs is write the adverbs. Just write them down. Just write it as you normally would. Then go back before you go write the next chapter or at the end of a writing session. Go back and cut the adverb. Just delete it. Find and replace and insert a space in its, or an X or some other indicator, so that 1, you see how frequently you do it, and 2, it's not living in the manuscript. And see if that helps you sort of go, oh my God, I use adverbs all the damn time. I should try something different. First step to changing anything is catching yourself doing it and then recognizing it and doing something about it. So that's how you get better at adverbs. Question 9. What's the worst mistake you ever saw in a first draft? Oh, okay. The worst thing I ever saw in a first draft. I got bait and switched once. I was doing submissions for a company, and somebody submitted their first draft because it was unsolicited submissions, meaning they didn't need an agent. They were desperate to get published, though, so they send their first draft in, and they tell you in the query, "It's my first draft, yay!" And the first 300, 400 words, so the first page and a half, presents one story, and it's graphic and offensive and racist and like real jarring. And then all of a sudden you get to page 3 and it's this totally mismatched, differently racist, differently offensive story. And that's where the bulk of the book was. And what this person decided to do in their first draft was create this shock opening. Oh my God, I can't believe, look at all the expletives, look at all the racial slurs. And then you were supposed to get, and then turn the page just to see, counting on the fact that it's a car crash and you can't look away. You turn the page and see, oh my God, there's more of it, only to find out that there's supposed to be a real story once you get past the shock opening. And the idea was, only the real people who are serious about publishing it will make it past the second page or whatever. This is a bad strategy. I don't want to condone this or recommend this. Don't do this. Just don't. It never ever works that way. No. Don't bait and switch the reader. Don't use your draft. First of all, don't submit your first drafts for publication. That's no. You are capable of better work. Other people deserve better work. Just make a second draft. But the worst thing I ever saw was a bait and switch with this sort of chip on your shoulder approach to being the writer. Oh, I'm so good at this, and once you get past my, it was a test. Ha 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 ha. I'm the coolest, or whatever nonsense they were telling themselves. That's the worst thing I ever saw. I think I told that story on Discord, like the specifics of it. If you want to know, go jump over to the Discord, and at some point tomorrow morning I'll tell that story. It's real bad. Loads of racial slurs, and then a really strange, inappropriate, pedophilic story thereafter. It was, I was a younger, beardless, sensitive man, and it was a mess. Nope. But I can look back on it now and go, oh my God, that's ridiculous. But yes, that's the worst thing I ever saw. Other questions as we round the home stretch here. I'm so glad, new people. Hello, new people. I'm so glad this has been helpful for you. That's really the whole point of these things. You come hang out, you ask your questions about anything, and you get some answers, and you go on about your way, and hopefully you're a better writer for it. That's the point. And you can literally ask about anything, like, hey John, what does a semicolon do? Or how do I publish a nonfiction article about ducks or something? There's a reason why this is slowly becoming the greatest writing community on Twitch, primarily because I'm Twitch's only writing coach. So that does play a factor in things. But yeah, we're slowly taking over the globe, like a very slow bunch of insects, just crawling our way across the landmass. Questions, issues, etc. Okay. All right. Just so we're clear, I have seen the Obi-Wan Kenobi trailer. I love all of you. Please stop DMing me on Twitter about it. I know. I'm gonna talk about it this weekend. But oh man. 15 people have been like, have you seen this trailer, dude? Yes, man. I've totally seen the trailer. Number of times. It's going to be rad. It'll be on, I'll do something on Patreon for it, I promise. It'll be real good. But yes, you can stop sending me the link. I've seen it. Other questions, issues, etc. Else we will march on to our final 3 questions. Question 10. What would it take for you to start posting writing advice threads again on Twitter? Oh, well, all right. So let's do some backstory first. So long time ago, in the pre-oligarch era, I was on Twitter every day, and I was on Twitter every day posting a writing thread somewhere between 7 and 20 something posts, all in one thread where I would just walk through a thing like, hey, we're going to talk about characters in tweet after tweet after tweet. And this was back in the day before when Twitter was 140 characters, not 280. And they were long-winded as hell. I wasn't streaming at this point. I was doing audio-only versions of this chat on, I don't know if you can see behind me, but my old Blue Yeti microphone. And I was in Zoom. And it was not the allegedly technically polished stuff that this is. And I didn't even have a board for a lot of it. It was just me, wishing I had sound effects and talking into a microphone. And sort of, I spent a year talking to myself. But I would still produce these writing threads like 3, 4, 5 times a week because I didn't have anybody to talk to, and I wanted to produce stuff, and I wanted people to notice what I was doing and give a shit about the story. And it was one of those things where I did it, and at the time I was doing it, nobody noticed. It felt like nobody really paid attention, but then hours later, days later, weeks, months later, at conventions and conferences, people were like, "Oh, I follow your stuff on Twitter. I love your writing advice threads. They're super helpful." Well, after a while, I started wondering, well, why didn't you say something at the time? Like, it would have taken you 10 seconds to go, "Hey, I really appreciate that. Thanks." Because one of the reasons I stopped was nobody was saying anything, and it felt like I was talking to the wall. Which I don't know if you've ever tried talking to a wall. It's pretty discouraging after a while. So I eventually stopped because I was wasting my time. The business at the time was really, really floundering. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I couldn't really seem to get anything off the ground except these goddamn free writing advice threads. And I was really frustrated and nothing seemed to be clicking. So I stopped. And that allowed me to focus on different things and get the business off the ground. And the writing advice threads became infrequent. And then after a while, they totally stopped because I would talk about other things like politics and gaming and film and butts and root beer. And I'd hang out with my friends. And I started using Twitter for more than just, oh my God, this desperate grab to have somebody ask me if I knew what stories were. And then Twitter changed. And I changed, and Twitter changed some more, and I went on to other things, and I do this now. And I'm on Twitter very rarely because it's just less and less good every day for my mental health. I still think it's potentially a good platform and a good tool. I think it is slowly souring based on a number of oligarchic, rich, apartheid, rock jewelry factors. I think it'll get worse before it gets better. But in terms of what it would take to have me start posting writing advice threads on Twitter, give me $2 million. Give me $2 million, and I will write writing advice threads every day for 30 days straight. $2 million. And not $2 million before an electronic service takes its cut. $2 million after the 10% to PayPal or the Stripe credit card fees. $2 million, and I'll put it back up. If you're looking for that writing advice, other than coming here or checking out the podcast or jumping over to YouTube and checking out the YouTube archive, you can go read the blog, writernextdoor.com. Years and years and years of stuff is there. You can also go over to Patreon, patreon.com/JohnHelpsYouCreate, where there's tons of that stuff too. And I get to talk about movies, which is real nice, as part of Watch Movies Write Better. This week it's Goodfellas and The Batman. The Batman it didn't stick with me. Goodfellas didn't stick with me either. You'll find out if you're a Patreon patron on Friday and Saturday. But writing advice threads on Twitter, 2 million, please. That's my price tag. Until then, you're going to have to come find my writing advice elsewhere or ask me individually. and I will be happy to tailor the advice specific to you at length. Twitter is also no longer the medium for where I can really dive into stuff. Somebody asked me the other day, hey, John, how do you do like variable, like chronology and timeline and stories? There is no earthly way, because I've got to draw diagrams. There's no earthly way I can break that down in tweets. So for the moment, real deep writing advice is over on the Discord, which is accessible through the Patreon. Or as a client, you can just, ask, and I will detail you in audio, video, or otherwise, whatever lengthy stuff you want. Or come check out any of the streams and recordings, because that's where all the writing advice stuff has migrated as I've become more production-oriented, I guess would be the word. Good question. Question 11. Any tips at getting better at describing things? Yes. Here is a shorthand. Now, we covered this in Every Sentence is a Camera, but here, let's expand on that. I'm assuming the word thing in this context are objects. We're going to talk about it as objects, and then we're going to talk about it in terms of actions. Because if you're describing something else, there are probably different ways to do it overall. But if we're describing objects, first of all, we need to figure out two different things about this object. One, what is it? Is it a couch? Is it a chair? Is it a glass? Is it a body part? Is it a car? What is this thing? That's going to be item number one. We do that first so we know what words we can use and what ideas we can get across. Item number two, we have to figure out where this thing, this object, whatever it is in space relative to other things we either will talk about or have already spoken about. So if we're describing, I don't know, my tea on the desk right here, my tea, which I'm about to finish. If I'm describing the tea in the glass, which is now empty, but if I'm describing the tea, I'm going to talk about it in terms of its color, because that's the way you can distinguish it from the water glass that is right next to it. And it helps paint a picture in your head if I were to describe it by one of its most noticeable traits. Because if you're watching the screen, you can't necessarily determine the temperature of that tea, or its age, or how long it's been here, which is about 10 minutes before we started recording. But you can't determine those factors based on the limited perspective of the camera. So it's contingent on me to find the way to describe the thing that puts the clearest, not most complete, just clearest picture in your head. Because no one detail is going to do all the heavy lifting. So it's not going to be one detail and poof, you totally got it. It's going to be multiple details. Multiple details that all work together in order to give you that complete, even though complete's a bullshit idea, but it's going to give you a total pile of things. So if I talk about my tea in terms of its potency, in terms of its color, in terms of its the taste, if I talk about how cold it was, if I talk about how I started this cup of tea with dinner, which I don't recommend. If you ever have a baked potato with chives and cheese, don't have hibiscus tea with it. You get a weird taste in your mouth. But you want to talk about those things, the thing, whatever it is, talk about it and describe it in a way that helps put a picture in the reader's head. Now, some of you, the artists out there, hi artists, might be thinking, well, do I talk about the positive space or the negative space? Do I talk about the object's details? Or do I talk about the space around the object? That's up to you. Positive details, positive things, talking about what a thing is rather than what a thing isn't is always going to help a vast majority of readers more than anything else. So talk about what it is. Describe it, detailing it, laying it out in ways that put a picture in the reader's head. And if you want to talk about it in terms of temperature or density or age or sweetness or whatever factors you want, find those words, describe that thing. That's job number one. Job number two, where is this object in relation to other objects? Well, the teacup is on the coaster next to the other coaster with the water glass. It's next to the mouse. It's next to my phone stand. It's next to the little bean bag I use to amuse the cat. It's next to a coffee cup full of pens. It's next to the bottle cap from the root beer I had the other night. It's next to let me see what else is over here. Phone charger, the cord to things. So I can, by describing one thing and mentioning its place briefly, I open the door then to describing other things on the desk, and all of a sudden you get a more accurate, more complete, but not entirely complete because we're only talking about one part, but you get more detail about more things, and you can draw a picture of, oh shit, John hasn't cleaned off the desk today. No, that's because John's going to do it after the stream, because John does it after every stream. But you pick and choose the things you want to describe to put that picture in the reader's head, because that's job critical number one. We talk about an object's relationship in terms of distance or space to other things, so the reader can know that it's not just like floating out in the holodeck randomly. Like you ever see like a space video with like astronauts doing shit in space, and the little things, the bubbles of liquid, they're bobbing their head forward to drink it, or they're catching and juggling in space, and it's all so silly and really amusing when you're in elementary school. You know that kind of disconnected sense of where things are. We don't want that. We don't want a disconnected sense that we're just mentioning things and they appear and then they disappear. We don't want poof and then back. We want to make these things feel real. We want to make these things feel grounded. So we describe objects in their relationship to the distance to other objects. If you have, two people and they're about to sit down at dinner, you talk about them at the distance to each other. Because we want a picture of it. We want to know, where's this one character, where's this other character? Are they facing each other? Are they facing away? Are they near? Are they far? Understanding that means being able to picture it in your head, paused, frozen. And then you're able to describe it. And then you can move them and refreeze it. And then all of a sudden describe that. And you're constantly moving I'm going to move the camera all around in this sort of jarring stop motion-y way in order to build the composite of all the different things. Now, if you're describing actions, if your things that you're describing are actions, we're going to do much the same stuff, except instead of describing a single item's stationary description, the T's color, its temperature, the amount, all that, you're going to describe the action in progress or the action as it happened. John ran up the stairs. The natural segue there is that I would then describe the stairs, or I would describe the motion I took to run. John took the stairs 2 at a time. The old wood creaked beneath his slippers. Something like that. But you describe the action in a way where the reader can picture it. And this isn't just true for really active stuff like running. You can also do this for chewing or tapping a pen or sitting and reading. Any action. You describe it in a way that the reader can picture the character doing whatever they're doing. Job number 1. Job number 2, you're going to describe something about the end result or effect of that action, or the relationship of that action to the world around it. What does that mean? That means if we're going to talk about running up and down the stairs, we're going to talk about the effect that running has on the stairs. Do the floorboards squeak? Is the person winded when they come running up the 5th flight of stairs? Is, somebody bleeding after they get punched in the nose? Is the punch moving through the air with a tight fist? You find the relationship of the action to the things involved in the action and describe it and expand the idea of the action. Because it's not just punch in this nebulous conceptual way. It's, somebody punching somebody else, or somebody kissing somebody else, or somebody, carrying this or running that. It's active. So it's not just the verb, it's the verb in motion. It's the verb in motion with items. And it all builds a context. Your goal here, no matter what you're describing, is to make sure that the composition of it, the words you choose, the number of words you choose, how you put all that shit together. You're building context for the reader so that it doesn't feel like they're, those old-timey telegrams where it's read a sentence, stop, read a sentence, stop, read a sentence, stop, and it feels really like almost comedic and jarring. Yeah, we want to get away from that. So what we want to do instead is create a context where sentence number 1 plus sentence number 2 plus sentence number 3 plus sentence number however many all roll the snowball down the hill, all add up together to give the reader, by the time they're done reading all those sentences, they get a bigger picture, a better picture, a more HD picture, a more IMAX movie in their brain than if they just read the one sentence at a time and stopped and waited and then moved to the next sentence. We do this by practice, over and over, draft after draft, sentence after sentence, paragraph after paragraph, page after page, over and over and over again until we are satisfied by it. And then we move on with our process. Awesome. Love that question. Love that detail. Hell yeah, let's go. Final question of the night. Gentle advice. Question number 12. Aren't you ever worried that the art you're putting out there isn't getting noticed or having an impact? Me, personally, I worry about that every day. I worry about whether or not what I do matters every day. More than I even talk about on social media. More than I ever talk about with people. I worry about it every day. Why? Because I know me. I know my amount of self-doubt. I know my limitations. I know my goals. I know my ambitions. I know my faults. And I know how quickly things can turn from I'm doing really well to, oh, I fucked this all up, because I know me. And I know my audience, both in terms of like, oh, I know those people, but also I know how well I grow and what they do and where I do it and how accessible that is. And I know the scuttlebutt around me. And I know that there's people who say this thing and those people who say that thing. And I try not to pay attention to it, but it's still lagging around in my head. I always wonder if I'm being noticed. I always wonder if I'm having an impact. That's why long time ago, I made sure that I would always thank you for being here. Or I'm always thankful when someone calls and asks a question. Or I'm always excited when someone subscribes because you're literally feeding me. Or when another month comes by and I get to do more Patreon stuff. I am deeply concerned, maybe even too concerned, depending on who you ask, as to the nature of being noticed or having an impact. I no longer go out of my way to try and get noticed, like in that sensational, wild, performative way, because I'm old and tired and it wasn't working, and the climate is no longer the same. But by and large, I do worry about my impact. When I have a client, new or old, come to me and say, this is really great, thank you so much, I didn't know that, this makes a huge difference. Or I have somebody tell me like, oh my God, I won an award. Or, oh, hey, I'm going to get published now. Or, they write me a thank you note in their dedication, or they send me a free copy of their book, or, something like that. It means the world to me. I have 2 whole bookcases of books I've gotten from clients in 20 years, where it's just, I helped make that thing. I know I had an impact on that one person, and presumably at least on one other person who read that book. That means something to me. It matters. Where things have turned, I've started to question how other people put their eggs in that basket, because I'm outside of the writing sphere. I don't write so much anymore. I spend my time helping other people write. I'm happier there. I have fewer heart attacks that way. The last time I really got into writing, it drove me over the it's not my thing anymore. I'm happier in the teacher instructor-y kind of space, which is cool. I'm happy there. But I notice a lot of writers of all different stripes and all different flavors, of all different kinds, really wondering, really worrying if people care and if anybody's going to know. and if anybody's going to buy their stuff. And they're thinking about this stuff well before they need to. Like, they're on draft 1 and they're worrying about, oh my God, nobody's going to buy this book. You're on the first draft. Book's not even a book yet. It's a Word doc. Barely. You're putting the cart not only well before the horse, you're putting the cart like 2 states away from where the horse is standing. It's not bad or wrong to worry about getting noticed. It's not bad or wrong to worry about having impact. But to worry about that starting at a point in the process where getting noticed and having the impact are completely irrelevant is a huge trap. And it's a great paralyzer. It's a great paralytic, I should say. I got an itch. It's a great way to convince yourself to stop. It's a great way to hold and arrest your progress. Because if you're still in the drafting stage, if you're still in the early drafting stage, the only impact this should be having is on your ability and your confidence to say, fuck yeah, I'm making a thing. It's going great. And you're able to adjudicate that, not because you're thinking about the dollar signs or the sales or anything like that, but you're able to say that because you're excited and happy and proud of yourself that you wrote a thing, that you made a thing, that you did a thing. At that early production stage, the impact you should be sweating is the impact on yourself. Once you complete it, once you finish it, once you start getting it polished and you start turning it from an inward-facing thing to an outward, other people-facing thing, then you can start questioning about, how do I get it noticed? How do I get eyes on this thing? Because you're going to need them, because that's the next stage in the process. How you get eyes on things. Do you do it in beneficial, positive ways? Do you do it with embarrassment? Do you do it with fear? Do you do it boldly? Do you do it proudly? Do you do it unapologetically? And then after that, once you get eyes on it, once you get noticed, then you can worry about having an impact, because you can only have an impact after you do a thing. Just like the words you wrote while you were writing it had an impact because it was, fuck yeah, I'm done. But now it's, if somebody else reads this, whatever it is, are they going to be moved? Are they going to feel what I mean for them to feel? Are they going to feel it at all? Are they going to feel it enough? Are they going to feel it more? Is this book going to do for them what some book has done for me, and all of a sudden has me thinking about, the future and life among the stars and how to elevate civilization and other great hyperbolic things? This is a book I'm going to be able to say, hell yeah, you got to read this book. It changed everything for me. It made me appreciate things in a new way. You can't worry that it will or won't do that when you're still writing it, because you're not done. Think about the bread example. We've talked about that so many times. You can't compare the store-bought loaf of bread with the bag of flour in your pantry or the dough that you've got rising on the counter, because while it one day will be bread, it is not bread at the time. And if you put your bread after you make the dough in the oven and let it cook, you keep opening the door to check it to make sure it's turning into bread, it's never going to turn into bread. And even after you make the bread and you put your bread up against the store-bought bread, it's not going to look the same. But that doesn't make it any less bread. In fact, your bread might be better. You have to give it a chance. Remember, we talked about that way back at the beginning. It's a 50-50 chance. Getting noticed and having an impact are things that happen after the fact. They happen after the creative process. You got to make the thing first, and then you can get it noticed. You can get noticed for the act of making, sure. But even then, you still have to have made a thing or be in the middle of making a thing in order to have that noticed. If you're waiting to get noticed, and then when you realize everybody's looking at you, then you get started, it's not going to last. Because you shouldn't be making this for other people. You shouldn't be going out of your way to try and force an impact and force people to get, to force them to care. That's the mistake I made in my 20s. You can't make it happen. You can't force it. You have to let it develop organically. You can encourage it. You can do a lot of things in varying levels of authenticity and intensity and urgency to help manufacture it, to help it happen. But at the same time, you can't make it. I used to work with people in an industry that thrived on controversy, thrived on it. Ratings and success and finances depended on the ability to generate controversy. And it was fun at the time when you're 20 and it's 8 o'clock in the morning and you're stoned and you're trying to get noticed on a national news feed in the background. It's less funny and less amusing when you're tired from trying to do it 6 days in a row because you need it to happen so that you can get a paycheck. You can't force it. Your best work, whatever it is, will by its nature, by the benefit of your labor on it, be the thing that gets you noticed. You do a good job, you do the best you can, you put it in front of people, it will be noticed for its quality. That's why quality matters. That's why training matters. That's why education matters. That's why craft matters. That's why practice matters. The impact you want to have, the ability to be an author we know by last name, or the ability to be an author we talk about long into the future, comes from not just, oh, how well you chased a trend, or how delightful it was that your book got optioned into a Netflix series that got canceled after 2 years. What makes you a lasting icon of things is your ability within your language, via your craft, with your skills, the ability to speak to anybody on a more universal level, because you can get to that point where no matter who they are, no matter where they are, no matter how they are, you can find something in them that connects them to everybody else, and you can speak to it. That's what allows books to have impact. It's not just the fact that you created, like, oh man, you made Klingons. Good for you. You made Klingons. But it's the fact that what those Star Trek stories speak to can be found to some degree in all of us. That's what the impact comes from. The fact that it's Klingons, or the fact that it's Tribbles, or the fact that it's Q. Those are all nice, neat extra bells and whistles. But it's always the deeper stuff that gives us an impact. And it's always the deeper stuff that we talk about in terms of getting noticed down the road. Because that's the stuff that helps art connect to other people. That's how we sustain this. So am I worried about it? Every goddamn minute of the day. I'm worried about it now. There's this little indicator over here. You can't see it from here, but there's this little indicator on my board, and it goes up and down. It tells me more or less within 30 seconds how many people are conceivably watching. I don't know if I should automatically subtract one because I'm running the thing, so maybe it counts me. I don't know. But I look at that all the time. Whenever you see me looking down, it's because I'm looking at that. Because I'm terrified of the idea that I'm back to talking to the wall. And I don't want to do that. I want to make sure I'm reaching people. I want to make sure I'm doing what I can, the best I can, to help as many people as I can when I can. So yeah, I totally worry about it. But I've also learned that I can't really let it stop me. Some days I do talk to nobody. I've had so many streams where I think like, oh God, people are going to line up around the corner for this. Oh man, I'm going to say a thing and people are just going to come out of the woodwork, and like 2 people show up. That doesn't mean it was a 2-person idea. And it doesn't mean I did a 2-person worth of delivery. That's just how things were. As a writer, that doesn't mean you wrote a shitty book. It just means that at the time, based on how you pitched it, based on factors in and out of your control, that's just how it was. But are you worried about it? Yeah. The minute this camera and these lights go out, I will sit here and clean this desk and absolutely positively worry that this whole thing sucked. And then I will think about the amount of editing I have to do tomorrow and the number of appointments I have to do where I have to leave the house. I have to wear pants tomorrow. And the entire time I'm there, I'm going to worry about what I have to do when I come home. And I'm going to worry about the number of things I have to do the next day and the day after. I'm always worried about this stuff. It doesn't go away. I know I have to wear pants. It sucks. But it comes down to I can't let it stop. I can't let it stop me. I can't let it sit there. I know, pants. I know. They're nice pants. I don't know if I'll put a picture of them up. Like, I'm having weird body things again, like it's the 90s. But they're nice pants. I spent money on pants. But yeah, I got to wear pants just for a couple hours. Sucks. But I worry about the impact. I worry about the impact on everything. So, yeah. All right, let's go wide and get out of here. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. It was a long and I forgot to hear. Hang on, I forgot the harp. And if I don't put the harp, then people are going to ask me where the gentle advice harp was. So there, Allie, there was the gentle advice harp. All right. Yeah. All right. So let's get out of here, shall we? To the end, to the outro. Oh, man. All right. So, hell of a day. Hell of a night. First one back after COVID, cold, plague, flu death. That was nice. It was good to be back. It was good to answer these questions. I was excited about it. And it was nice. And I missed you all. And I was very happy to be here. The next time I'm here, well, I don't know if you know this, but the next time I'm here is Monday the 9th. And we're going to talk about outlining. It's pretty rad. I'm going to make it even radder. So that's on Monday, May the 9th. We're going to talk about outlining. And the next Writer's Chat will be on May the 11th, a week from today at 7 p.m. Eastern, right here at twitch.tv. I always get that wrong. Twitch.tv/John Helps You Write Better. And if you liked this and you want to check out everything else I'm doing, it's over at patreon.com/John Helps You Create. Audio for this will be available over on the podcast feed within 20-something minutes from this finishing. And, of course, everything will be up on YouTube, youtube.com/John Adamus, my name, tomorrow, because YouTube is powered by hamsters, so it takes forever to upload. Until next time, fight fascism in all corners, fight hate, do your best, love each other and love yourself. All power to all people. Be kind to yourself. Please don't wear pants if you don't have to. A lot of you are amazing, great people, and I love all of you, and you are better than pants. And I will talk to you very, very soon. See you.